Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are in Colorado at a very cool stop that I have only seen a little bit of information about. So today we're going to be exploring the property of the Florissant Fossil Bed National Monument. That is a mouthful. Florissant Fossil Bed National Monument. Let's go. Now it all kicks off as you first enter the park with the Hornbeck Homestead. The first turn off to your right, you can come down and check out a map and get the lay of the land, and then come down to this area. Now while at this site, you can find out about all of the different hiking trails, as well as what all kinds of critters actually call this area home. Not to mention, it does have the information for the visitor center right here, which is only a short distance away. Now, because this is a national monument, they do accept our park pass, so we'll be using that today. Remember, if you're interested in going to a lot of national parks or national monuments, the park pass is the best investment that you can make of $80, because for one whole calendar year, you can go to as many places as you would like to. Now, walking around the homestead, the doors are not open today, so we can't go inside, but you can kind of peek into the windows and see some of the items that are inside of the different rooms. And it's pretty cool looking. I mean, there's some signs that we're going to go check into to find out a little bit more about what the significance of the homestead is, but a very well preserved building for sure. This sign helps us to have a little context for the homestead itself. This is Charlotte Hill, and she was considered to be one of the earliest scientists in this area. It says here that she actually made several different finds, including this one right here, which is super, super neat. Her collections ultimately helped to unveil the full reputation of... Turns out her contributions to science actually helped to fully unveil this site as a world-class fossil site. And it all started with a little aspiration and a little grit, determination, and the ability to live off of the land. Now, Miss Charlotte Hill was actually known as one of the first to discover fossils in this area. So this park is attributed to her hard work and dedication. And I think that is so cool. So while we're stopping off here at the homestead, we're getting our backstory so that when we get to the visitor center, it'll all make sense. Now, much like Miss Charlotte, there was another pioneer woman of this area who was a homesteader, and it was the actual owner of the property that we're looking at right now. This was Adeline Hornbeck. She was not considered to be a typical homesteader by any means. Now, here on this little placard outside, you can actually see a little bit of information about what the buildings would have been on this property. So for example, the homestead house itself, and then the well house directly beside it. Then behind you have a bunkhouse, a carriage shed, and a barn. So translating that, you have the main house with the well house attached. Behind that is the bunkhouse. This is the carriage house, and then the small barn. Now, what made Miss Adeline so prolific in this area, and what made her so much different than other homesteaders? Well, she had actually already lost 2 husbands and 2 homes. As a mother of 4, she moved to this area in order to find opportunity and possibility of prosperity. And before long, after settling onto 160 acres here in the valley area, she found that success. In fact, within only 7 years, she had not only built the buildings that we see represented here, but she had a total of 9 outbuildings. She also had accumulated $4,000 worth of livestock after coming from absolutely nothing. And her strength was a true testament of the true pioneer women out there. And I think that that's cool that our first stop into this amazing park is celebrating the legacy of these 2 very unique women as we're going along this little trail that follows this homestead. Now from here, if you wanted to, you could actually walk all the way to the visitor center, which is over here. Or you could take this trail in the opposite direction that goes more toward the hills to see the wildlife viewing area. Now, if you're interested in going and seeing the wildlife viewing area, the best possible time for you to find the larger animals is either early in the morning or later in the evening. But if you get here kind of at midday like I am, you can see the little critters like the ground squirrels and the smaller birds. Now I've returned to the little kiosk at the front, and there's some photos of what it looks like inside. They do have ranger talks here, so if you are visiting, check with the visitor center and see if they're having one at the homestead. Now, ranger talks are one of my favorite things because they tell you so many things that can't be put on one of these signs. They really deep dive into very specialty kinds of things. So again, check to see if they have one of those. The wildlife loop I was looking at is about 3.8 miles, I just found out. And so I wanted to share that because it is moderate. That means that if you are out here and you have water and some good shoes, you can get some good views. But alas, I am saving our hiking today for something very special. So let's go to the visitor center. We just got to the visitor center and I pulled up and look at this. This is awesome, guys. I don't know whose vehicle this is, but I have not seen one like this in a parking lot or anywhere for that matter. And this is so cool. I love this. If this is your car, leave a comment below because it is awesome. Okay, so the National Monument here is doing it a little bit different. The visitor center area is only open for like restrooms and things like that, but they actually have a little travel museum outside so you can see what some of the fossils look like. And then you can talk to an actual ranger as well in case you have any questions about the trails, the things that you're going to be seeing, or all of the cool stuff that has been found here at this particular park. It's so neat. And then again, you can go into the bathroom here. But today we're going to be exploring one particular trail that I'm super excited about. This is going to be the bread and butter kind of trail for this place. It's going to tell you a little bit more about the location, and along the way I've been told they have some really cool signs. So guess what, guys? We're visiting this national monument, but today we're actually doing one of our 52 hike challenges. Now, a little side note, whenever we traveled in California, we went to the Redwood National Forest. We saw the huge trees there, and they were so big. But did you know that there were actually redwoods at one point in Colorado? Yeah, redwoods in Colorado. In fact, what would you say if I told you this was the remainder of a giant redwood? In fact, about 34 million years ago, I know that's a long time to fathom, but trees like this were everywhere. That was until a volcano erupted and covered them in 15 feet of volcanic debris, thus petrifying them. In fact, it's said that 34 million years ago that this area was much different in the way that it was made up. They say here that it was much warmer, and also that the foresting looked a lot different than it currently does. In fact, it probably looked a lot more like the Pacific Northwest. Just outside of this area where they also do ranger talks, right here, you see a sign about the clones. And we've talked about this a little bit before when we were at the Redwoods, but just kind of how this works. You see this big stump right here? Well, it actually would create these other little trees that would be considered its clones instead of dying. Now, the way this works is quite fascinating. When a tree would get older, instead of just dropping little seedlings everywhere, they would actually use the tree itself for all the nutrients. So it would be attached to the original tree. And the reason why this is so cool is because it's very unique and doesn't happen with all trees. In fact, I don't think I've seen another tree, period, that's kind of like this. But right under this pavilion over here is a prime example of what one of those cloned trees would have looked like. There's a trio here, and this trio is actually coming from what would have been the mother tree. So what you're seeing there is actually the 3 little sprouts that would have come out of this base area. And that base area would have been the original tree, but they're all interconnected. That's so neat. Now, while this pavilion is also cool because of the ranger talks, it also serves a purpose. These trees right here are actually in harm's way. Being out in the elements like this, they're constantly decaying and being damaged by the weathering and by the water and by all the different elements. So in 2001, they actually built this shelter right here to help. It doesn't fully fix everything, but they've also added in different drain grates and things like that in hopes of preserving these 3 interconnected clones. You can also see they've placed some bands around them to keep them from expanding outward and crumbling. I mean, it's just a lot of things that have gone into this particular site to make it available for us to continue to learn about all of these ancient mysteries. And I think that that's so cool. In fact, if we go back to the signs here, you can actually see what they looked like in the 1920s whenever they were first uncovered. And then here's a photograph that was actually taken in 2015. They used this really unique system so that they could photograph all the different parts of the stumps. And then from those images, they created this 3D print, which is just super neat and helps us to kind of see what the trees would look like from all different angles. And you can actually touch this one too. It's kind of neat. But these 3 over here aren't the only ones that are protected by this shelter. In fact, there is a much larger singular one right over here that is wow. At one point in time, the world was very different, and as you can see here, tourists were actually sitting on one of these stumps. And this is what those stumps look like in more modern days. Now, much like the photo shows, people would sit on things or they would pick up things, and they weren't protected at that time. And so what once was said to be fields upon fields of petrified pieces is now not so much. And I think that that's why it's important to have national monuments where you protect and keep intact the things that are here. Who knows what could have been petrified within that wood? It could have been fossils of species that we've never even heard of, and now they've walked away and gone to someone's home, and we'll never know. So I think that that's why structures like this, places like this, and things like this are very important. Now, looking around this area right here, would you believe that there was once an ancient lake here? Yeah, somewhere probably in this area out here was a lake. And they said that it only was here for probably a few thousand years. But while here, it left fossils behind, which have now been found. And they are so impressive. In fact, according to this sign, they have found everything from a water scorpion and a bowfin to a dragonfly nymph. They have found caddisfly larvae, dragonflies, maple leaves, diving beetles, and so many more. Now that is interesting. I find it really cool whenever you come up to a place that looks like this, only to be told that it didn't always look like this. It makes you, in your mind, try to visualize what it might have been like when it was covered in water. Wow. Just also kind of makes you think, all the places that we go with all the lakes and things like that, will they be there for future generations? And if not, what will they find? I mean, super, super cool questions come from coming out to sites just like this. Now, one of the things that I have learned throughout not only this site but others is that the Native Americans used to call this home. And to some extent, many of the things that are in this area are still used by the Native Americans in some way, shape, or form. This next sign is a testament to the Ute tribes. For example, all of these plants right here are actually associated with being used within the Ute tribe. And it's neat because if you look at them, it tells you what the name that we would more realistically have probably heard, like wax currant, and then it tells us the Ute name, which is Pugwep. That's kind of neat. And then it tells us what the general use is also, and that would have been for food, for example. But if you go down here to this one, the ponderosa pine, which we've been seeing everywhere here, they actually could use this medicinally too. That's really, really cool. In fact, the top part of this sign has a quote from someone who actually is from the Northern Ute cultural rights and protections. And she goes on to say, "This is such a rich valley, this whole area. Coming here into this valley, it is so green and lush, and who wouldn't want to be here? This is a great area, kind of like a cultural grocery store." And I mean, she's right. As you look through this valley, you can find a variety of different kinds of unique plants. And it's so cool to see how those plants could actually be used. Now, I think so often that we neglect to realize the value of the things around us. We look on at this field and see prairie grass. No big deal. Prairie grass is everywhere, right? Wrong. Prairie grass actually has a purpose that helped people at one point in time when they didn't have grocery stores, when they couldn't just go to the corner market and pick up whatever it is they needed. They would forage it off the land. And so coming out here, it's endless possibilities. Everywhere you look, there's something of importance. Look guys, there's another one of those trees. This one's a smaller one, but still, wow. Little did we know when we just saw that small one that right next to it was something called the big stump. Whoa! Now this picture was actually taken in 1893, and this was the big stump then. But this is the big stump now. Now, at one point in time, they believed that this particular they believed that this big, huge stump right here could have been up to 230 feet tall. Now you're probably asking, what happened to the top of it? Why did the other part not get petrified? Now remember how we said that the trees were covered up to 15 feet? Well, anything that wasn't covered would rot and decay. This part was actually kept and preserved under the layers of ash and rock. So that's why we see what we do today the way that we do. And the other pieces that would have broken off would have been what was littering the ground around, and some of the smaller ones like that one over there. Now over here by the big stump right here, we have something called the Big Five Scientists. And this actually says that scientists began to arrive here in the 1870s, but over 150 scientists have now followed in their footsteps to come out and study here at the fossil beds. But these are some of the most noted originals right here. Now remember when we were at the homestead up there and we talked about Charlotte? Charlotte was actually a pioneer in the field for women when it came to this particular site. And although she isn't listed on this particular plaque right here, I talked to one of the rangers and she actually said that because of the women who made discoveries in this region, tons of other women have come to work here and to learn more about the field of geology through this site. And I think that that is awesome! A little girl power moment again. And for all you men who are watching, don't worry, you have lots of representation too. There were so many discoveries made here. For example, this guy right here, he actually was here and the first to publish information about the paleontology, and he did that in 1873. Or this guy, he actually worked for the Geological Survey and was one of the first scientists to actually visit the area. And then this guy right here, he actually came from the University of Colorado and stayed here between 1906 and 1908. And he organized numerous expeditions. One of the cool things about this though is, it doesn't just tell who these guys are, it also shows some of their findings, which are so neat because you can actually see what these fossils would have looked like. I think this one's my favorite. This is amazing. And in fact, just to tell you how important this site is, this one single site has produced enough information that they now have displays at 20 different museums and universities, not only here in the United States, but also in the UK. But again, with the big stump here, I think you can see why. Wow! I mean, I never knew that there were redwoods anywhere other than California until I came here and saw this. And now, it's got me questioning everything, guys. Now, on previous signs, we've noticed that when they discovered things like the big stump, they turned it into a tourist destination. However, this tells us a little bit more about the history of the property and what has kind of brought it to where it is now. It says up here in 1883, for example, the Colorado Museum Association actually purchased this property from Adam and Charlotte Hill. After this, a train station was actually moved into this area, and even though you don't really see any signs of it here on the park property now, this area actually became like a little pop-up boom. Now, following along the timeline, it was 1927 that the Singer family, which this is them right here, actually purchased the property and turned it into the Colorado Petrified Forest and Dude Ranch. Now, don't let the terms Dude Ranch throw you off, because the Singers actually wanted to protect the land and to turn it into an educational space. And so by purchasing it, that's what they did. They led educational programs while also using it as a working ranch. But after his death in the 1960s, Agnes needed a home for her property. She could no longer maintain it and provide the services that she needed to as she was getting older. And so she decided to pen 2 letters in order to try to get the national park to take over the land. And her efforts did not go unnoticed. I have found that this property is surrounded by women who have done amazing things. From the homesteader up there to Charlotte, the scientist, to Agnes, who so willingly wanted to give her land so that we could come out here today. In fact, in 1973, this did become a national monument, and I can absolutely see why. It is amazing, and even though when you're just looking at the trails, they might appear somewhat flat next to these beautiful plains, it might not seem to be quite as challenging as some of those mountainous climbs that you can do in Colorado Springs. The beauty is apparent here, and the purpose, and the education, all the things I love to do right out here at the fossil beds. And just like that, we have completed our 1 mile trail today. And wow, was it worth it. We have arrived back at the visitor center and this was awesome. Now they do have several other trails here which I definitely encourage you to check out. They are really, really good. And also they have some other cool things that they do, like those ranger talks. So definitely check in whenever you visit and you will not regret it. I hope you have enjoyed today's video, and if you have, make sure you leave a like on this, subscribe, and check out my future uploads. I have tons of cool stuff coming from Colorado and you're not going to want to miss it. Till next time guys, bye!